look, what we want to do is discuss what I would call a couple of our side's dirty little secrets, because I think they form part of an overriding theme in your presentation. And this is a dirty little secret that the woke establishment, the ones who control academia, etc., don't want people focusing on. And they particularly don't want someone like Valentina to present this message because she's a leading world authority in this area. She is also an oddity in the academic world. She's an employed professor, not Professor Emeritus. She is also a completely honest scientist with incorruptible ethical values. And that basic secret is that simple. The Earth stands, and mankind, of course, stands to suffer much more greatly under a global cooling scenario than it ever did under a global warming, or even pause as it now is. And there is going to be way more people, indisputable fact, who die during a bitter winter than ever die during a hot summer. And not only people, but it will also affect crops. It will see the crop yield decrease significantly. It will place a heavy burden. Potential famine can result. I don't want to be too alarmist, but millions of people in a marginal existence could die as a result of this. It's happened before in history. They're the sort of things that the general public are totally unaware of at current. And what's called the woke establishment, the predatory billionaires, the sycophantic media, the fake scientists, the useful idiots who actually believe all this rubbish that they're preaching, they want you just to focus on runaway global warming, global heating, global boiling, weather maps that seem to almost internally, spontaneously, combust during the 6 o'clock news. They want that sort of message delivered. Now, our other dirty little secret is one, again, that even the elites don't want to have to admit. And that's simply that mankind can never influence the natural environment in any significant way. It just can't be done. Despite all the money and power and hubris they possess, they can't change the natural environment. Now, this reminds me, in fact, of being a latter-day example of what happened over 1,000 years ago when King Canute took his throne to the seashore, ordered it be placed there, and commanded the tide not to come in. You can no more do that than fly in the air. And neither can you alter in any way the sun's regular 11-year cycle, or the amount of sunspot activities occurring on the sun's surface, or the amount of cosmic radiation that the Earth receives. All these things are beyond human control. Now, this and more topics will, of course, be covered tonight by Valentina in her address, which we're all very much looking forward to. She will give the address, and then Kevin will coordinate a Q&A that will include Zoom audience attendees with questions along with our own. So make sure, everyone, that you come armed with a question or two. Also, Valentina is a little bit on the bio side. She has been the Professor of Mathematics at Northumbria University since 2013. She has published over 200 peer-reviewed papers in various scientific journals, and none more important than the seminal work she did before the then onset of the current modern grand solar minimum, which is going to run between the years 2020, okay, that's been, and 2053. So it's already happening. This has influenced thought in many different areas and, of course, resulted in blowback. I mean, you can't put in the face of some of these people the message that they don't want to hear. In fact, it was only on the weekend when I was compiling the weekly report that I chanced upon an article in USA Today that said, oh no, it's not the sun that controls the climate, it's CO2. I mean, you know, this drivel will never end. Valentina's also stared down a much more serious challenge to her authority with flying colours that happened a couple of years ago. And so she stands as a shining example to us of someone who combines integrity and steadfastness in a nature. And she does it in a difficult time with what I describe basically as an academic swamp that she has to deal with. And I think that she is a beacon of hope to all us climate and energy realists the world over. So much pleasure in introducing Professor Valentina Zharkova. If you could give her a warm welcome.
Hi, everyone. Great pleasure to be here. Okay, so we speak about ground solar minimum and what is in store. And here the website, solargsm.com. I will place this talk later onto this website. You can download it. So there's some my co-authors. And we come back to the sun. So, you know, they deny that the sun plays any role, but we have only one heater in our solar system. It is the sun. Nothing else can heat. So this is how sun looks like in the solar activity. So when the solar activity is low, it is very weak sun, no active region and nothing. And when solar activity becomes high, you see a lot of active region, bright points on the sun. And this is how solar activity changes over 11 years. We know this very well. And it happened that in 19th century, 18th century, it was discovered that the solar activity changes with the number of sunspots. Here, the number of sunspots, which dark spots on the solar surface called photosphere. And this dark spot, this is close up, they look like big dark umbra and shadowy penumbra. And the sunspot appears somewhere within the royal zone between plus minus 30, 40 degrees of latitude. And over the cycle, they migrate towards the equator, like is shown in here. And we know that the solar activity is well defined by the sunspot, average sunspot numbers. Here, example, we're moving on. So the sunspot, you know, this average sunspot number index, well known, last 200 years, they keep using it, defining it manually, or observe now this many observers from different observatory with the index and they do the averaging. When they invented magnetograph, they discovered that the sunspot, basically, these are the places where magnetic flux loops are embedded into the photosphere. So this is what our sunspot are roots of the magnetic loop. So basically, they indicate strong magnetic field. So the magnetic field in the sunspot 1,000 times higher than surrounding field, and sunspot are almost every time come in pairs because they represent the loops, and the loops have opposite polarities. So this explains, this gave a push to the theories that sunspot magnetic loops are generated by solar dynamo and the Tucker line, or the bottom of solar convective zone, and they travel during the from minimum till maximum to the surface, and during the maximum appear on the surface as the magnetic flux loop and sunspot. So basically what is acting on the sun during minimum solar activity, you have northern poles, northern, and southern poles, southern magnetic field. But during the maximum, this magnetic field migrating to the south and migrating to the north, and northern migrating to the south. And the next minimum solar activity, the magnetic field changed. So northern polarity has southern activity, and southern polarity has northern activity. Southern pole has northern polarity. So this is how solar dynamo works in action. And we started this project absolutely by chance. We got European grant of solar observation. My main topic is solar plasma physics. And if you look at the 1998 discovered sunquakes, it was very widely covered. And this is paper published in Nature. But this came with the European grant, and we started looking at the sunspot and magnetic field. And this is how sun looks in magnetogram. This is the magnetogram. This magnetic field, dark is northern polarity, bright is southern polarity. So what we look at, that if you put the same magnetogram, not only sunspot, you put magnetic field synoptic maps, everyday map, put this in 2D dimension. And if you put this synoptic map for the cycle, this is cycle 21, this is cycle 22 and 23, you see that magnetic field of background also follows like butterfly diagrams in there. So, and then you see how the magnetic field, this northern polarity, migrates to the north, to the upper part of the, and the south and to the south, and the changes in the next cycle. So this is what brought our attention that probably we can use not sunspots, because idea of this project, European project, was to introduce automated sunspot index. We tried to automate sunspot index in average sunspot numbers, and it was very difficult because it brings a lot of human perception, which you cannot quantify in the computerized science. So then we compared the solar background magnetic field on the top. It was paper Zharkova et al. 2008 in solar physics. And this is the southern polarity background field. And compared with the sunspot magnetic field, which we derived from our catalogs, which we created about 150,000 sunspot measured at that time. And we discovered that the basically polarity, leading polarity of sunspot is opposite polarity to the background magnetic field. But basically everything is repeated in this background field. And correlation is very high. And what we found that the background field actually derives where sunspots appear and how they migrate towards the magnetic field, toward the pole, toward the equator. So in this case, we decided to look at the whole magnetic field of the sun. Remember, we have this until 1976, modern time. But what we have on the magnetic field, we have a sum of magnetic field together. While we want to derive the components of the magnetic field which we see on the surface. And it brought to my attention, remember this very nice picture on the top left, when you put the glass prism and put white light on the one side, because of the different diffraction index of wavelengths of light of different wavelengths, suddenly we got split and we got rainbow coming on the right-hand side, like it's shown here. So white light, which doesn't have the wavelengths, after coming through this prism, suddenly split into nice colors, red, orange, green, blue, and navy, indigo, and so on. And we thought, what can split the magnetic field into the components? And it was specific software or specific method, which was developed actually 1901. It was nearly 1.5 centuries ago. And when you put solar magnetic data and run on them principal component analysis, you can get these components 1, 2, 3, and whatever. So this is what we done. We run principal component analysis, and this is what we got. We got this eigenvalues, which define these principal components, each of them. And what was the surprise was that these eigenvalues came in pairs. So largest eigenvalues, they were split by variance. So you have the data, and the maximum variance came to the first two components, which turn out later were produced by dipole magnetic field. So what we basically done, I just explained in simple terms, we found the natural frequency of the sun. So these components, these are natural waves which sun is designed to produce. It's called natural frequencies. To give you example in life, what is natural frequency? This is my motorway, M62 in 2017, when we had snow and big gales. And these are lighting poles, which are heavy metals. They are not so easy moved, but because gale was about 50 miles per hour, it coincided with natural frequency of oscillation of these poles. And they started oscillating like they are kind of paper. You see that? So this is why natural frequency of each system is very important. And I'm very surprised that nobody calculated before natural frequency of the sun, but we done it. So we discovered the dipole, the waves produced by dipole magnetic source, and the dipole produced by quadruple magnetic sources, and waves produced by sextuple and octuple, and so on. But when you form octuple, it covers nearly 95% of variance of all the data. So this is fine. How these data look like? Oh, just reminder you, natural frequency. If you remember Tacoma Bridge, Tacoma Narrows Bridge in America, somewhere in the 40s, which was collapsed because the people who built it forgotten to calculate natural frequency, which was induced by gales of about 50 miles per hour. And after one gale was flown, this metal and concrete bridge completely collapsed. So if you go on the website and do it, the same happened with the freeway in California in 89 when the earthquake happened. So natural frequency is a very important issue. And this is what we got. We got the main wave principal two components of the sun magnetic field presented here with the red and blue line, which are traveling, as you see, they're traveling from opposite hemispheres, and in the hemisphere where they got maximum become the most active hemisphere. So this is cycle 21, cycle 22, cycle 23. This is what we used in our papers 214 and 215. And on the right-hand side, this is what we have predicted. But at that time, we didn't have yet. Think we used the data for cycle 23. And while we were progressing the paper, we got middle of cycle 24. So we can compare the data which we predicted with those which were later measured. And we found the very close fit of the data which we produced. And these are the data with the waves which are coming in the cycle 25 and cycle 26. What we see here, that these two waves, actually, they have close frequencies, but they have phase between them. So one wave runs out from another wave. And this is first time we discovered in 2014 that in cycle 26, it looks like this wave become in antiphase. And what it means, if they're in antiphase, this is a slide from my lecture notes for the students of the first year university. So you have one wave is described in top wave, they say cosine, whatever, and another wave described the bottom line. And D is a difference in frequencies. This one wave is running away from another. And the resulting wave is a blue one. So you see, if the frequency, if the phase are in antiphase, the amplitude becomes zero. If they are in phase, the amplitude is doubled. This is how blue line shows. So the same happens on the sun. What we managed to do, when we split magnetic field into components, like red line, blue line. We managed to actually quantify these components with the mathematical formula for 5 cosine functions defined by these two formula. This blue line and the red line, they defined by this, and these coefficients are fully derived, which allowed us. So now we got a formula for for magnetic field variations, and we use actually the method developed by Smith and Lipton and their software called Eureka. So after that, we calculated the summary curve. So we added these two functions, and we tried to understand what we discovered, right? So far, there are sunspots somewhere there, and here this magnetic field eigenvector. What do these eigenvectors and the summary curve represent? So this is accuracy of our detection with the mathematical formula, which is 97%, as you see. So what we did, we compared our summary curve with the sunspot numbers. This is what was comparison in the paper 2015. We found that basically the summary curve roughly represents sunspot number, but it cannot be the same one because sunspots are defined by toroidal magnetic field of the sun, and the background field, which we are using, defined by poloidal magnetic field of the sun. So they're not exactly the same. But now when we know that this is possibly the representation of solar activity, this is our cycle 24, this is cycle 25. And it can be seen that the cycle 26 will have very low amplitude. And at that time, we didn't know why it is because we didn't run yet dynamo models, but the same results were obtained by Katiashvili, Bridka, Velaska, others. They shown that the solar activity is reducing cycle 25, 26, and 27. Recently, we published paper in monthly notice 22. We extended to the cycle 24, we added it, and our eigenvalues, eigenvectors will not change. You see, they still represent pretty nicely sunspot numbers, but it is not exact representation because they represent different entities, as I said. But in that paper 22, we managed to use quadruple component and discovered that quadruple component actually represent the soft X-ray flare flux. So the quadruple component is responsible for the solar activity and appearance of new flux loop, which produce flares and coronal mass ejections. So definitely it's working in the right direction. But the main thing it came, remember we have this nice formula which describes the components. So we now can calculate solar activity for 2000 years, and for paper 2015, we calculated from 1200 for 3200. And what we discovered that amplitude of the cycles actually is governed by this overlapping envelope curve. And the cycle, 11-year cycle, on top of it, we have this 350 or 400 year cycle called the solar grand cycle. And where this cycle come from, we reported this result at the National Astronomy meeting, and it was coverage with the Royal Astronomical Society press release, so you can go and see, and was widely covered by media if you look at this result, because first time we look at the data. So this is where we are, the data we used. This is what was Maunder minimum and delta minimum. And it turned out that we are approaching actually the hibernation next ground solar minimum. It was in 2015, we were in cycle 24. So definitely cycle 25, 26, and 27 were ahead of us, and we're standing in front of ground solar minimum. At that time, it was accepted very well, but suddenly anthropogenic global warming people become very concerned because their models cannot reproduce even Mount minimum. The model that does not allow to have reduction of temperature when you have minimum solar activity. So they said, no, the modern ground solar minimum is not coming. And this is where the fight started, but it was like weak fight kind of thing. But we compared, because we have this formula, we have formula coming is 5 cosine functions. So we calculated our summary curve back to 1,000 years before Christ. And this is blue is our curve. And red is the curve produced by Solanki and Usoskin, which show reproduction from carbon. So what we can see is that our curve nicely reproduces most main ground solar minimum, which occur Maunder minimum, Oort minimum, Wolf minimum, even Gameric heat exactly. The only one we could reproduce per minimum in 1400, 1600, because it was not reproduced what they measure. Basically, at that time, it was very strong gamma ray radiation from supernova, Vela Junior, which affected the background. And when they calculated carbon dioxide abundances, they used usual background. So they basically missed this minimum, probably will be reflected to the Mount minimum, because the difference in time with their own background is about 300 years. So it's exactly the one which they obtained. So when you look also, this is first time we noticed when we calculated that we have like 5 different shapes of ground solar minimum. So you have one like normal one, then one is very high amplitude, and one is very low amplitude, but very extended. And when you look backwards, you see those cycle repeating in backwards as well. So this is forward, and this is backwards. They were here, 1, 5, 4, the same shapes. So it looked like these ground solar minimum cycle repeated every 5 ground cycles. And this gave us food for the next paper, which we published 2019, which was later retracted, and we'll come back to that. So anyway, we got this ground solar cycle, and we got that we are approaching the ground solar minimum, which is really very unique situation. We are sitting in the front row watching ground solar minimum with all instrumentation we have. So we cannot deny, we never had this option with Mount minimum, because you remember the telescope was only invented by Galileo in 17th century. So, but most of the Mount minimum went without observations with the telescope. So anyway, what we did, as I would hit nicely with this curve, given that we use only 3 cycles, but we still hit Homeric minimum, Oort minimum, medieval maximum, Wolf minimum. We didn't get Spur minimum, but we got Maunder and Dalton. So this is what we got. And recently we published paper, we done frequencies analysis. So we analyze frequency of average sunspot numbers. And this is wavelet analysis. And this is global wavelet spectrum, shows that the main frequency in sunspot 10.7 years in the last 200 years or 150. But and the same analysis of modern of the sunspot of the our summary curve gives us the same 10.7. So remember, we got the curves more or less equal, and the period of the oscillation more or less equal, or no, more or less exactly equal. So this is why we can, despite the magnetic field they represent, here this magnetic field representing toroidal magnetic field, toroidal sunspot number, and this is the On the right-hand side, the magnetic field reproducing poloidal, or our index, which we introduced. So anyway, we compared the curve, so the green is our curve, and the red is average sunspot number. So we started 1700 until 2024. And on the right-hand side, we run correlation analysis of each part of the curve. So if you use the full number of sunspot, the correlation is about 35. But when we start moving, when the sunspot were measured much more accurately, for example, 1900 until 2023, we got highest correlation, 67% between our curve and sunspot number. And remember that we're using only the dipole magnetic field. This is maximum we can get, because 67% by standard deviation, this is what dipole magnetic waves producing. So we found this is a very good correlation, and we can say that we introduced new proxy of solar activity, principal component of solar background magnetic field. And the principal components are paired, meaning that it has to be double dynamo waves. They generated in two different layers. And the strongest two principal components, they cover more than 40% of variance or 60% of standard deviation. So you see now what I mean, that we cannot get higher than 67% because we used only dipole magnetic waves. If we would add quadruple and sextuple, we can get to 95%. So this is right way to go. Prediction of the solar activity on millennium scale shows ground solar cycle with the period 350, 400 years. Some cycles have even 330 years. And what is interesting that we entered now into ground solar minimum, the next one, 2020, 2053. And we showed the prediction next ground solar minimum will be 2375 to 2415. So this is the thing which came up. And this is the first time, actually, we can predict solar activity not for one cycle like they currently do. We predict for 2000 or 3000 years. So this is a really huge jump ahead. But we wanted to, and so far, everything what we done, it was not the model. Everything what we done, it was produced from observation of magnetic field. It was pure observational result. Then we try to understand what this observational result tells us. So we looked at the model, solar dynamo model, and by that time, absolutely independently in the year 2013, Zhao et al., using SDO data, measured that the sun has actually two cells inside of each hemisphere. And one is blue with meridional circulation this direction, and another which is under the surface of the sun, and another is red, which has circulation opposite direction, which is close to the Takac line or bottom of the convective zone. And these two cells, they interfere in this border when the meridional circulation has opposite direction. And this is when we obtain these two waves with close but not equal frequency, which interfere with each other. So we apply dynamo model in these two layers in each. And I remind you that we have two waves which run away from each other with some phase difference. And again, it is an excursus from my lecture note for students on waves. So when you have two waves, then the resulting wave, this small one, 11-year cycle, is defined by this half sum of these waves, two waves, the frequency of that, but the amplitude is defined by sign of difference of the frequency, which form this envelope curve. So this pure mathematics, no any interaction or things, just from classic mathematical law. So this is amplitude for the envelope, and this is what we got for simulation. So we calculated, on the top is the colloidal magnetic field. It's Elena Popova who calculated it for us. And you can see that the first time with magnetic field, she can reproduce nearly closely the shape of each ground solar cycles. This is more extended, please, it is more extended. This is more round, and so on. This is the first time the dynamo model could represent results for about 2000 years. So obviously we were in the right direction. And we also build butterfly diagrams, but we built butterfly diagram, let's say, for Mount the Minimum. We wanted to see what will be developing for the modern ground solar cycle minimum. So we look Mount the Minimum. These are the observations for Mount the Minimum with the maximum clusters 1710 and 1720. And exactly this way we reproduce model also cluster 1710 and 1720. So obviously model works not only for temporal variation, but also for butterfly diagrams. And this is what we expect for the current ground solar minimum, which will be lasting much shorter. It lasting only 3 solar cycles, which already started cycle 25. This is cycle 26, which is very weak. And then cycle 27 start picking up something. So this is the prediction, and this is published in my papers. If you look at the publication in the solargsm.com, you will find these results. Why it is so important? Why it big buzz about ground solar minimum, which we entered? This is why. Lin et al., 1995, they calculated, they look at the variation of all these isotopes and calculated that during previous ground solar minimum, which Mount the Minimum, the solar radiance was reduced by about 3 watt per square meters. And here I summarized what kind of change of solar radiance was during ground solar minimum. So some say 3, some say 2, but nonetheless, these are all presented. So what it means that when the solar radiance is reduced by 3 watt per square meter in the Mount the Minimum, the temperature on the Earth, average temperature on the Earth, reduced by about 1 degree Celsius. So these are the temperature which is reproduced by LAMP 9722, and then in the book of Easterbrook, 2016. If during ground solar minimum, the temperature reduced by 1 degree, so we came here when we get this global warming, but if we came to the ground solar minimum, it will be reduction here. The extension up there will be cold. So how it will be affecting the Earth? The only paper which investigated how it will be affected, not only average temperature on the whole Earth, but variation of the temperature on the whole globe, actually, was calculated Schindler et al. 2001 Science. And here I give their press release, which is still available. I know paper in Science is available on the subscription, but I have it. If anyone interested, I can send it to you, send me email. But here is a press release, which is still hanging on the NASA website, which you can see these graphs. So basically what it shows, the variations of the temperature by about 1 degree, especially Northern Hemisphere, Russia, Northern Europe, and Northern America. This is where huge decrease will be. So we probably would expect the similar one in the upcoming ground solar minimum. So Europe and North America went in deep freeze. Alpine glacier extended over valley farmland. Sea ice crept south from Arctics, and Danube and Thames River and canals in Netherlands froze regularly during Mount the Minimum. This is what they discovered based on this map. And the drop of the temperature was related to drop abundances of ozone created by reduction of solar ultraviolet light in the stratosphere. And this is the layer located between 10 and 50 kilometers on their surface. And how this happened? Less ozone, they affected the atmospheric wave, and this created, so when you have enough standard solar heating, your standard jet stream is covered in here. It doesn't go to the lower latitude. But when you have less ozone, it goes these giant wiggles of jet streams in the picture. And these wiggles goes to the Northern America and north of Europe and Asia, and it kicks off North Atlantic oscillation, the balance between a permanent low pressure system near Greenland and permanent high pressure system in its south into a negative phase. And this is wiggles and jet stream from Arctics. These are the ones which cause snow and cause a lot of frost. This led to Europe remain unusually cold during Mount the Minimum. This is what the guys explain and in that paper in 2001. So what is happening now? Closer to our own cinema. We're sitting in front row, and this is the picture from Royal Belgian Astronomical Observatory, which shows how for cycle 25, the increase of number spotless days without spots is the highest for the whole period of observations, which clearly indicates that we are entering the ground solar minimum, because all the previous one was the highest for cycle 10 and 15, and it was when we observed Dalton minimum. But this is much higher. This is ground solar minimum. So we are there. But because we are at the moment at the maximum of cycle 25, we still have enough solar heat and we have solar flares. But what they say, just wait until sun comes through the maximum and goes to the descending phase. So what we observed, even 2020, snow Carpathian Mountains in July, and many examples. We get January 2020 snow and frost was observed in Amman, Arabia, first one in 150 years. And then New York City had the suggested 89 New York City West Side Highway will be underwater by 2009. You know, it never happened. And early snow Canada 2021, January, February 24. They have frost in Boston, in New York this winter, but British news never reported about frost and snow there. They only reported about some heat in Spain for one day for 29 degrees. This was important, but this one, snow and frost, it isn't important, but it will become an important. And remember summer snow in south of Australia. I have a nice picture from Canada, 22-23, when there was huge snow, and a picture from your newspapers in November 2022, when it was snow in your summer. So definitely the ground solar minimum starting, even the sun is in the maximum cycle 25. So ground solar minimum doesn't mean that you completely disappear the whole radiation. The solar activity is still coming through normal cycle. Amplitude will be lower, but still it will be maximum, and we observe the maximum. But what we have, seasickness was increased from 2018 to 2020. So definitely, and it still continues to grow. The same happening in Antarctic, which I don't have slide, but I heard on the news and see the link to the website presentation. And modern GSM is progressing. Unprecedented winter storms in Colombia, and even NOAA and NASA AP agree, because they put full-blown ground solar minimum they declared on their website. Maybe now they removed Gavin Smith maybe made them remove, but it was at that time when I did this presentation, 2022, it was on their website. And they agreed that the weakest cycle, 25 weakest in the past 200 years. So these are the ice sheet grew in August from 2012 to 2013, contrary to Al Gore, that ice caps will disappear. No, they keep growing. And what we got the ground solar minimum we started developing. It is a unique event in solar terrestrial connection, which will reveal pros and cons of solar dynamo model. We see a decrease of solar magnetic field, and the people who measure interplanetary magnetic field, they already reported this decrease. And we know what this decrease means. It will be big impact of ozone layer reduction, high clouds formation, and the direction change. You will have cold jets from Arctic and Antarctic. Also, it increased volcanic and earthquake activity, which I didn't touch it, but we also published paper. And what it means that we will have effect on terrestrial temperature because reduction of solar radiation, which means the temperature should be decreasing by 1 degree. And and consequences, how it is decreasing? It's decreasing because it become colder. What was happened during Mount the minimum, it was snow in June and May, and people didn't have enough time for vegetation period for vegetables and others. If you remember, I don't know if Australia, they given the news, but last year in April, we had snow and frost in Spain and Morocco, and it was lasting for a whole week. And basically it wiped off completely all the greeneries which UK buys from Spain and Morocco. So they needed to find where to buy all the salads and all the vegetables and move. I think they bought in Israel and somewhere in South America. So this is consequences which we're expecting to have. It will be shortage of vegetation period because of the decreased radiation of the sun and these cold jets coming from Arctics, and will definitely lead to possible food shortage for people and for animals, of course. Not speaking that we need to heat the houses and need heating, and not intermittent heating like windmills, solar batteries. You need constant heating. And I remember then when we had cold winter 2018 with the jets coming in UK, and it was so cold that people, -10, needed to sit at home and heat houses. Some didn't go. When the people put heating in houses during the day, the plants couldn't get enough energy to run the plants, because our plant station energy producing plants, they calculated for particular scenario, for particular power. They cannot produce more than they designed for. So if it will become cold, what will happen? Only the houses and plants which are closer to the power station will get enough electricity. The other guys need to wait until they're satisfied and the electricity come to them, because it cannot come delivered to them. So it will be really, really serious issue. We need to be gathered with the intergovernmental. Okay, do you hear me, folks? Hello? So basically, this is what we get. And hello, do we have anyone?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you again.
Okay.
Yes, we're hearing you perfectly, Valentina. We had a new person come in, and I tried to mute them, and I accidentally muted you, and then I couldn't unmute you. So it's been a very exciting period.
So what I bring you, what is the buzz? We've understood what is going on and what to expect with ground solar minimum. But to say so, this is the bottom curve. This is solar cycles and solar activity and solar radiation coming from solar activity with the thick blue line. And this is the bus of ground solar minimum. They say in the temperature, 11-year average keep increasing. And because solar activity is decreasing and temperature is increasing, they say, all right, the sun cannot cause this increase of the temperature. While what we done using this, remember I have formula, so I calculated the summary curve for actually 120,000 years. And we discovered that when we build this summary curve, remember each 5 cycles are semi-similar. You see they're semi-similar. It's a last 10,000 years in Holocene. So they're semi-similar, but what we discovered, that the zero line, which here looks like 0, but in reality, the 0 line is like this navy line. It's very nice, like cosine function. And because it has such a beautiful, nice shape, it's a baseline or 0 line of magnetic field. What we discovered that basically the magnetic polarity 0 line becomes enhanced either southern or northern, which indicates that the Earth become closer to the sun with either North Pole or with the Southern Pole, depending where it is. And how it could be happening, this is how we look. We look with this variation, and that this period of this very nice sine function of oscillation of the background of the baseline of magnetic field coincided with the 2 millennium variation of solar irradiance, which was reported by Reams, by many others. They called so-called Halstead cycle, 2 millennium Halstead cycle, actually 2 millennium 100 or 2 millennium 300 years. And we recently published paper showing this cycle indeed exists. But at that time, we first time discovered that obviously the sun and Earth distance must be oscillating, because this is so correct cosine function of the oscillation 0 line indicates has to be orbital motion. So we look where we are in the current cycle, and we discovered that we actually on the race phase of the current super ground cycle of this Halstead cycle, which will reach maximum in 2600 years. And the inclination of increase of solar radiance and magnetic field is actually have the same slope. So basically, when you put the solar radiance and you put magnetic field, they actually follow the same line. And this is how we found that, it should be probably because of this change of the distance, the solar radiance changes. And what it indicates now that the distance should be decreasing in this cycle, because the polarity, it means that it decreasing when the Earth is turned towards the sun with the northern pole. It has to be decreasing since probably spring equinox. So this how it would happen. This decrease of distance will be increasing the solar radiance and causing this decrease of the temperature, which defined by this straight line. So what we did, we look at the various cycles, Milankovitch cycles, probably you heard about them, but the main thing, we look at the solar inertial motion. So when Kepler introduced the solar system model, when the old planets are rotating in each orbits, it was very nice, smart solution. By that time, Newton did not report yet his laws of gravitation. Only 20 years later, Newton discovered gravitation, and they were not reflected in Kepler laws. In only 1965, it was first time calculated that the sun actually not sitting in the center of the Earth-Sun system or body center of the solar system, but it is affected by the gravitation of large planets. And basically here how it moves. So this is your body center, the cross, but red is the maximum diameter of the orbit of the sun, and green show you where the sun appears in different years. So if you look at this, it's called solar inertial motion. When the sun is dragged from the ellipse focus, where it should be sitting from the here, towards the areas which is equal to 4 radius of the sun. It's pretty large area. And we calculated, so these are orbits of the sun in the different years. If you look at the years, for example, 1905, so the sun would be in this position. And it turned out that for 2000, the sun would be closer towards the spring equinox. So if you put these orbits in here, put the sun in there, so it means that the sun becomes closer to the Earth in March until probably July, August. This is the part where the sun occurs. And this was published in the paper 2019 about baseline oscillations, but it caused a huge objection from anthropogenic global warming people. And it was Ken Rice presented that, no, this is the sun motion, like that one, and the Earth follows this motion. So Earth doesn't go on the ellipse, but follows the sun on this strange motion. Well, this was the reason they crucify us for 6 months on the website, and eventually made the editor to retract the paper. After 2 weeks retraction, it was 1st of March 2020. 2 weeks after that, I decided that I'm not sitting and pitying myself. I'm going to the NASA website for Sun-Earth distances and downloading these distances and proving that whatever written in the paper in 2019 is correct. These are half distances changing from 1600 to from 600 to 1600 and from 1600 to 2600. So we shown this distance changes exactly as we anticipated within this 2 diameter circle where the sun solar inertial motion occurs. So we calculated the distances for every month for 3 characteristic years for the millennium, 600, 1600, and 1600, 2600. Then we calculated the solar radiation. But the main thing, after calculation the distances, we showed that whatever Mr. Rice represented, it was not correct. The Earth still moves in the ellipse. So the solar body center is there, and the planets moves in the orbits around this. The only sun having little motion around this body center, and produces, we use inverse squared rho, produces solar radiance. We calculated whole solar radiance for every year for this period, and we shown that this solar radiance on the right-hand side, so in previous millennium, it was reduced, but in this millennium, it is increased by about 20-25 watt per square meter. This is why we have this heating right now. And this heating will continue until 2600. Whatever you do here, you can reduce, you can stop. CO2 actually is not very bad gas. You know that CO2 they use in garden centers to feed the plants because it is the food for plants. And at the moment, the Earth is still starving with CO2 because in previous years, CO2 was much higher. So we need more CO2, not less. But this increase of solar irradiance, we published paper absolutely recently, 2023. It was in November, October. We shown that this increase of solar irradiance gives exactly increase of the temperature, like Mr. Mann shown. It is a hockey stick. This is caused by this increase of radiation because the sun moved closer to the Earth during the spring equinox and heating mostly southern hemisphere in April and March and April, and then moving heat in this northern hemisphere while we have very hot summers. So this is the reason for it. Just remember. And the increase of this radiation, I found one paper which actually shown that even increase of radiation by 5 watt per square meter would lead to the main contribution that 60% will be heated by the sun, even in the models which they use now for IPCC. So even only increase 5 watt per square meter will give you the 60% heated by the sun. But remember, I shown the increase is 20 watt per square meter. Okay, you can split it between 2 hemispheres, it still gives you 10 watt per square meter. So definitely more than 90% is heating, 95% comes from the sun. And even with their model, which don't include heating properly. So anyway, to remind you what was then, we come into the modern warm period, increase of the temperature, and just look backwards what happened at the beginning of Anno Domini and the Roman Empire. It was very warm in at that period, and I lived in Scotland for a few years, and we found that Scots at that period, Romans, they had Roman baths heated by sun, the stone heated by sun, and they had grapes growing in Scotland. Imagine now it is very cold Scotland, but it is heading probably next 500 years it will return to this period because this is the period of Halstead cycle. So basically, I will skip this bit. Why CO2 cannot heat? Because the guys forgotten radiative transfer theory. They forgotten what they do. Basically, they add in CO2. They add in that you have CO2. Okay, I'll mention it a little bit. Why they included CO2? Because they didn't put enough heat in from the sun. They didn't include the solar natural motion. But the temperature still increases. It is observational fact. So what they said, they found this strong emission of CO2, red line. So, oh, this is how it heats back and heats the atmosphere. And they said there will be optical thickness of this emission will be 400. But when you have optical thickness and you have layer, you calculate not simply adding the emission, you calculate this as the integral multiplied by integral function E2, which is exponential with this coefficient, which basically, to explain you in the fingertips. So if your optical thickness less than 1, your radiation produced by CO2 will be linearly increasing. So you add in, with every molecule you added, you add radiation. But when your optical thickness exceeds 1, it becomes 10, 20, or 400 is there. The actual radiation is saturated. So it cannot exceed more emission that it comes at the optical thickness 1. So what they do, they ignore this fact. They still keep adding this radiation and obtaining from CO2, which basically basic mathematical error. This is it. So what we managed to reproduce, we managed to reproduce this straight line, increase of the temperature, and we show that increase of the temperature caused by the solar inertial motion, and this a variation caused by solar activity. And if the solar activity is reduced, if we come into ground solar minimum in here, then the temperature will be decreased, and then will be increased again during the next maximum. So basically, whatever the guys say, I wrote after I published the chapter, putting all these curves, all the distances between sun taken from official NASA ephemeris. It's not my calculation. It was NASA and Solar Paris Meudon Observatory. I sent a letter to Mr. Rice, Vice Chancellor in Edinburgh University, and said, your guy has a professorship in celestial mechanics. So either he doesn't know celestial mechanics, or if he makes such mistakes, or he knows celestial mechanics, but he hides from the public that the distance between sun and earth is changing. And she replied, he has right to have his own opinion and rise on the errors. So basically, they deny the fact and just misleading the public. So this is my opinion. So what we're expecting, even with this heating we have currently, the sun comes still in hibernation. And why they're afraid of the ground solar minimum? Because it doesn't matter that it is what is heated. If they say heated by CO2, let's heat is CO2. If I'm saying the sun become closer to the earth because this motion is 2000 years, another 500 left, it is still close to the earth. But when sun stops firing, flares, emission, and the coronal mass ejection and particles, the radiation and sun activity is decreased, and the radiation coming to the earth decreased despite the sun is closer to us. If your boiler is switched off, it's very nice, it's hanging on your wall, but if it is not working, it is not working. So what we're expecting, that terrestrial temperature will decrease because of ground solar minimum, which prove independently that the sun is the only source of energy on the earth. And this is what main consequences. We are in front of the very significant period of reduction of the temperature, and we need to prepare people to survive with that. And this is complete my talk, just summarizing what we have, and I'm happy to take the questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Valentina.
You're welcome.
Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question, if I can, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Darren. This is Darren de Bortley. Valentina, by the way, Darren owns a very famous wine company called de Bortley Wines. You may have heard of them. And Darren is very interested in this subject. We correspond occasionally. So over to you, Darren.
Yeah, so as Kevin mentioned, Valentina, it's climate change. Being a winemaker is very important where things are heading. One of the things that I'm intrigued about this, the sunspot activity and the magnetic field flipping. You know, it is possible it is actually a proxy for gravitational variability on the sun from the large planets. I know there was a paper talking about the resonance that you mentioned, that it's possible these large planets, even though they have a very small gravitational effect, but combined through resonance, they could in fact be driving the magnetic flips. Now, the spin from that is, and obviously, because I'm certainly a very strong believer that the gravitational change, they're also explaining Earth's weakening magnetic field, because if you're interfering with the Earth's geoelectrical dynamo, you're going to impact on the Earth's magnetic fields, and it's been weakening. And when you start looking at all the factors, it seems to me that the elephant in the room that's being missed is gravity, in terms of what explains a lot of these things. And notwithstanding the solar flares, eject mass have an influence on cloud formation, but also if you've got internal heat coming up from the planet, and notice the science on what keeps the planet hot in the last, since 2016, has been all over the place. Back then was probably the closest. It said 50% of the heat was coming from radioactive decay. and about 30% or thereabouts coming from primordial heat left over from the formation of the planet. And there was this other factor, which was, to me, was obviously gravitational driven friction heating. Now that changed. They got as high as 80% was due to radioactive decay, and then they said 20% primordial heating, and then later the Japanese proved that the radioactive decay was in fact responsible only about 50%, and then they changed that the primordial heat was 50%. Now that from a science point of view, that's getting on the verge of wacky stuff. But yeah, to my way of thinking, gravity is the big elephant in the room in all of this.
I fully agree with you. This is why they become so agitated, because no one considered the gravity. But there were some papers considering that even this formation of the magnetic loop at the bottom of Tucker line can be also related to gravitational forces. How small they are does matter. They crucify these papers. I'm not sure we can revive them, but to my own experience, we are now preparing the paper on the fact how these El Nino southern oscillation occur. And what we discovered that the most prominent periods in this El Nino is about 12 years, which is not related to solar activity. Solar activity, remember, 10.7 years, so it cannot be solar activity at much lower solar activity period. And the only period which was related to rotation of Jupiter. So basically, Jupiter and the Sun, when the Sun and Jupiter become in opposition, these are two particular locations, and we publish paper hopefully very soon, within a few months. These are with two locations and two part on the distances when the gravitation from Jupiter and gravitation from the Sun caused by Jupiter, dragged by Jupiter from the focus of the orbit of the ellipse, causes the underwater volcanic eruptions in the Pacific and produces the heating of the ocean waters traveling from the bottom to the top. And these El Ninos and La Ninas, this is what coming from. So we cannot deny, we need to look back and respect gravitation. Despite Newton invented it nearly 300 years ago, they still rely on this model of Kepler, ignoring completely gravitation, which we shouldn't, because obviously gravitation defines much more physics, not only inside the Sun, but it turned out inside even Earth. So I can only agree. I cannot make other people to do this, but there were some people who done dynamo models, and we now stuck with the variation of gravitation on the Earth, and I can only support your sentiment.
Yeah.
I really feel we are part of the solar system, and we have to respect our neighbors.
Yeah. Now, the other point too is the moon has an enormous variation. Now since 2032 we'll pass the closest since the beginning of the 20th century. In the year 2052, it'll be the closest in 300 years, within the last 300 years. And gravity is mass by mass over distance squared. And as you highlighted, small changes in distance have enormous effect on gravity, and which seems
Absolutely.
to be the so you have all these, the complexity is enormous when you start looking at all these variables. But my gut feeling says if the gravity is increasing from the moon, going to these elliptical cycles, variability, then yeah, that would explain the rapidly heating oceans, which the current science, the anthropogenic still never predicted. You know, and the speed of heating, and it's crazy because as the oceans heat up, they create more cyclones and hurricanes. They transfer an enormous amount of heat into the atmosphere.
Absolutely.
So their argument is if it's increasing, then we're in this with this loop, which is the doomsday scenario, which is a load of crap. Once you understand it's gravity driven, and the cloud cover then reflects a lot of heat, so the whole thing is very complex. Then you can understand, and that the cyclonic activity, low pressure systems transfer enormous amounts of energy into the atmosphere. You come to a completely different conclusion.
Yeah, this is what exactly we are finding, and I'm trying to verify it statistically, so it is presented with the best verification that the gravitation from the sun, from the Jupiter, and from the moon, we also include the moon. Thanks for mentioning it. We read the paper, so I can read. I don't know whether other IPCC people can read, but we read what the scientists say. And we found that we better calculate and see at which distances there will be. It doesn't affect ENSO as such, but it definitely affects some other part of the planetary, of our atmosphere for sure. This is correct.
But even they're showing that there's internal magnetic iron core is becoming distorted. The only force capable of doing that is gravity. It's, and when you understand the cores becoming, then you understand how you get increased friction heating because it's rotating around a internal mass that's not uniform. It's I just find unbelievable that they're missing this.
They're missing, and the poll, we published paper on volcanic eruptions, which was accepted to Nature scientific reports. We paid the fee, all was proofread, and suddenly they discovered, oh, it proves that solar activity affects volcanic eruptions, and they withdrew it. Similar happened in Astrophysical Journal, then we published. But the thing is, what we discovered, that magnetic pole, like you said, is from 16th century, 1585. It was very south in the lower latitude. Only now, the magnetic pole close to the geographical pole rotation and passing through, moving towards further lower latitude. So definitely gravitation affects very strongly our planet as well, because why this pole is migrating and what the consequences. If they affect ENSO, this is we only look at, we didn't look at other things, but some other scientists have to look at and respect our neighbors. So yeah, gravitation is very important part of it.
Are there any more questions? Anybody else want to ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah. Go, Bob.
Dr. Zharkova, have you presented any of this information to the British or any other governments? And if you have, what's their response been? Secondly,
yes, I went I went to my local MP and gave her result when it was when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, and she presented towards the MPs. But this hysteria with the global warming, they were like scared a little bit to accept it. But maybe now with Rishi Sunak, who turned around the energy and started supporting fossil fuel to some extent, despite he's still very careful, maybe it is having some influence, because I presented her result. At that time, we didn't publish papers which published in this year. So it was, I think, 2021 or 2022 we met with her. So the most recent papers were not yet presented. But they were very, very careful. And every time I made this MP and other members of the local government, but I forward to them CleanTel and any news. I just forward to them so they're within the loop. So maybe this affects them a little bit, because I'm pleased that Rishi Sunak decided to, they will put the oil and build the station, nuclear stations, because it will be a disaster. But they still still behind. They're still scared because you know how scary is the policies IPCC. The whole BBC is completely. They only mention what is about global warming. They forget to mention about huge frost in New York, huge frost in Boston this year. I needed to publish this paper on my Facebook to show people what they're missing. So it is very difficult to overcome media. When I reported first Grand Solar Minimum 2015, I gave interview to BBC4. It is recorded also interview in 2016 to Sky News and everything. But from 2019, from Paris agreement, I think they put a lot of restriction and they do not allow mention this Grand Solar Minimum. And BBC only speaks about this global warming and everything. So until the snow start falling on them in May, probably they will not start telling it. So, but the government knows some details. They didn't ask me yet to give the presentation, but I came through MPs, and I will give a talk. I think this in August they put a circle to the local government in South Yorkshire, where MP is resigned. So hopefully she will put forward again the new one for the new government. But it is difficult to get through, you know that, yeah? When this is pressure from Biden, Kerry, global warming, and poor. I have to say Republicans were much more perceptive to this Grand Solar Minimum, because I met when Trump was in the power, I met with a few Republicans in the Ritz Hotel in London, and specifically for them, I explained what is going on and where global warming come, and they were quite captivated with this, because it doesn't require anything from the top, bringing specific theory. It is everything physically defined, right? But then I didn't like Trump government particularly, but at least they had some realistic support of natural forces. But then Biden came and absolutely psycho developed in America. So I don't know. I believe this global warming is invented by Russia to destroy Western economies, because the only thing what they're getting is basically destroying livelihood of people. Electric batteries are not working, cars are not running, and so on. This is what my impression.
Given that, sorry, can I just do a supplementary question? Given that wind and solar don't provide enough energy now, and they're certainly not going, turbines don't move when they're frozen, and solar panels don't work when they're covered in snow and ice
Exactly.
for 10 months of the year, what power generation sources would you, if there was Prime Minister Zharkova, what would she be implementing as energy policies? And given that during the Little Ice Age, the population of the Earth was less than 500 million, and we have 8 billion people to feed, which we could potentially do with some very large greenhouses, but we would need an enormous amount of energy. Where do you recommend we, or what do you recommend we build? And if we can't build it, could you tell us the best place to move to escape?
Yeah, I'm not. You remember, I didn't live during the minimum, so I don't know exactly it will be. But what I would say that if I were Prime Minister, I wouldn't dismount all these fossil fuel stations with the gas and even with the coal. Of course, the best power station would be nuclear power station, but it takes nearly a decade to build it properly, or at least large number, 5 years. So when it comes, and Grand Solar Minimum, the worst it comes within 5 years. So we're now at the maximum solar activity, and the next 5-6 years, when it will come into the minimum, this is where the worst comes. And then we will not be able to build enough nuclear stations within the next 5 years. They started speaking about it. But you know that UK lost specialists in nuclear physics because they closed nuclear physics department because the guy who was at the power at that time said nuclear physics against the God, and they closed department on this reason. So now they need to come to French, ask them to give expertise and specialists to build the stations. But we still have gas stations which they try to dismount, and the coal station. This is the only way the country will survive. They need to keep them running, and then they will produce. Plus, they need to build probably greenhouses if they want to produce anything in the UK. But I don't know if you are aware, but Chinese entrepreneurs, they don't believe in this global warming IPCC idiotic model. They buy the land in Northern Africa because they know this will be the only lands which can produce, which will be not probably affected by this ground solar minimum and the jets from Arctica, where they can grow food for people and sell it at very escalated price. So Chinese are entrepreneurial, they buy in the land, they will be producing there. So probably you can move, if you wish, to north of Africa. But what my belief is that if ancient people managed to survive Mount the minimum, we could survive. The only thing we need to develop the skills how to heat your houses. And I'm thinking I'm buying the stove to heat the house. If electrical system stop working, it will be, I have woods around me, I probably buy coal to feed, and the cooker, which portable, not gas, maybe it will be supplied. And I have electric cooker. If electricity is not gone, I have nothing to cook. So this is why I got this portable, which you take for your picnics, and I think we'll be using. You need to think about it. You need to come back to the nature and remember how people lived before they invented. If government doesn't think about it, you need to think about yourself. This is what my advice would be.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment to Valentina, if I might. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive discussion. I'm thinking of one of the comments that you made early on in the piece. In fact, I think it was one of your first comments. You said there's one heater, the sun. That doesn't include radioactivity, which has been referred to previously by Darren. But I think if we want to understand what the part of gravity and radioactivity takes, we have to understand how the sun separated from the Earth in the first place. And currently, I think we've got a lot of work to do to get that right. The second point I need to talk about is that the radioactivity affects the temperature of the sea. And the sea is 71% of the Earth's surface. So what that means is that if we get a heating of any description from the radioactivity which is in the center of the Earth, we'll get slightly warmer seas. Now, if we get slightly warmer seas, we get an increase in humidity, and that has been recorded already. But the interesting thing about the higher global temperature giving more humidity is that it allows material to freeze and condense on the high ground. Now, this increases the albedo effect of the Earth. So you finish up with global cooling because the land cools, but the sea is hot. So you get two different reactions occurring there. Now, the question has also been asked about what do we do about it? Because as you so accurately pointed out, we lose a lot of the growing areas that we currently have. So that's the Northern Hemisphere. And we have to come further south. So the border in the US, instead of being protecting people coming up from the south, will be protecting people coming down from the north. So maybe
Exactly.
maybe they would have been moving to Mexico or possibly to Australia, because
Yeah.
I think that you'll find that the heating part, or the part that is warm, is in the southern part or in the equatorial parts. So there's two possible options for sanctuary. One is using the existing land, which I've just briefly referred to, and the other is to develop new land through reclamation. Now, we can do that because if we get albedo effect and a lot of condensing on high lands, the sea level will go down. And so if we look at the situation.
I have one comment, that radioactive activity is not heating.
It's not
Radioactive
heating.
is
Why does
not
it heat?
heating at all.
It's
The heat
exothermic.
comes from, as I mentioned before, we're investigating, the heat comes from underwater volcanoes,
Yes.
which produce a lot of lava from the earth. It is basic normal thermodynamic heating, and the heat in the ocean beneath, and this hot waters traveling from the bottom to the top, and they causing this El Nino and La Ninas. And we are finishing the paper, which was huge discovery for me. I never look at it. I read a lot of paper.
But Valentina, it's been a lovely presentation, a lovely discussion. We all learnt a heck of a lot from it. And finally, I'm reminded of Cap Allen, who runs the Electroverse site. Cap Allen used to end all of his posts with two suggestions. He said, relocate if you can and grow your own. I love that.
Well,
so thank you very much on behalf of everyone.
And if you have questions, you have my email, and I put the presentation on my website. You can download it if you wish to.
Fantastic, and we'll show you.
Thank you very much, Valentina.
You're very welcome.
You know.
Enjoy. Thank you very much for having me.